I'm often asked, what does it take, or what are the steps to becoming a success in sales? You might as well ask me, what does it take to become a success in life? Because the parallels between living a great life and selling for a living at an elite level are infinite. But when it comes to sales, there are 10 key qualities or 10 principles that I like to talk about when discussing attributes for success. And one of them, one of the most important, is learning to compete, competing to win, what I call chasing the championship. You have to, I'll tell you what, you have to learn to love to win. Those who sell at the highest levels love winning. They love to win. In fact, some of the greatest salespeople that I've ever worked with actually hate losing more than they love to win. But whether you love to win or hate to lose, you have to develop, you have to cultivate the mindset of a champion. And really, when we talk about developing the mindset of a champion, there are many qualities in that one principle alone. I mean, how do you foment, how do you form, how do you develop the mindset of an elite competitor? And there are certain principles that I can talk about, but in this session, I want to talk about one in particular. And this is one that can probably best be summed up by one of the greatest boxing matches of all time. The Thrilla in Manila, the fight between Muhammad Ali and Smokin' Joe Frazier. A classic, one of the greatest fights of all time. This fight took place in the Philippines in debilitating humidity, in 100-degree heat. This was a fight. It was the third match between Ali and Frazier. And in the first match, Smokin' Joe was the champion, and he had won. He beat Ali. In the second fight, Joe was no longer the champion. He and Ali, though, had a fight after George Foreman had taken the belt from Smokin' Joe. And it was Ali versus Frazier, no title on the line, and it was Smokin' Joe that walked away the loser this time. Ali was victorious. So each one of these guys had a win under their belt. It was one of the greatest rivalries in heavyweight boxing at the time. Finally, Ali had regained the title. Ali had beaten George Foreman, which was unthinkable at the time, to claim the crown. And everyone wanted to see the rubber match. Everyone wanted to see the third fight, the one that would decide it all. Who was going to win between Smokin' Joe and the great Muhammad Ali? And finally, on this night in Manila, at 100-degree heat, these two champions squared off against each other. And it was brutal. You know what? Smokin' Joe was always a slow starter, so in the first 5 rounds, really, Ali was sharp. Ali was shooting. Ali was really dictating the terms of the fight. And in fact, if you listen to the ringside announcers, they felt that it was all Ali's. But in the 5th round, the body shots that Smokin' Joe was delivering started to take its toll. And from the 5th round to the 10th round, this is when Smokin' Joe was coming. He was hitting Ali with body shots that could knock down walls. And Ali was starting to give in. In fact, now from the 5th to the 10th, if you listen to those ringside announcers, it sounded as if Smokin' Joe was going to take the title home. Okay? And in this heat, after about 10 rounds of this kind of brutal fighting, with Ali giving it everything he has, and Smokin' Joe with those concrete lifting shots to the body, both of these guys were just done. They were spent. They were exhausted. But Smokin' Joe more so. And in the 10th round, going into the 10th, Ali got his win back. He got his second win. And he was coming on strong. And he was shooting jabs into Smokin' Joe's face. He was blowing Joe's head up. You're talking about from the 10th to the 14th round. These two just went at it. And you know what? As many times as Ali was overwhelming Joe Frazier and hitting him in the face and hitting him in the head, Smokin' Joe was like a freight train. He kept coming and taking those shots and eating those punches. By the 14th round, these two guys were dead to the world. But if you looked at Joe Frazier, his face, his eyes, he was just one big swollen tomato. I'm talking about he couldn't see through his eyes. They were swollen up. They were just slits in his head. And Ali was exhausted. He could barely move. And in the 14th round, these two gave it everything they got. And in fact, Ali was quoted as saying after the fight, he was quoted as saying it was death. It was the closest thing you could come to dying going into that 14th round of a fight like this without actually dying. That's how debilitating the heat and the exhaustion and these guys giving it everything they had was. At that 14th round, when it was all over, Smoking Joe couldn't see. He was blind. And he stumbled back to his corner. Ali had given it everything he had. He had hit Smoking Joe with everything. And he was just exhausted. He couldn't lift his arms anymore. He couldn't breathe. He was dizzy. He was next to unconsciousness. And he stumbled back to his corner. And that both fighters sat back down in their chairs and they were done. They were literally finished. But here's the thing. In Smoking Joe's corner, you had a guy who, although he couldn't see, although he could barely think straight, he kept telling his corner man, he kept telling his manager, don't you stop this fight. Don't you stop this fight. Even though his eyes were swollen up, they were closed to slits, there were tears coming out of the man's eyes as he was telling his cornermen, whatever you do not stop this fight. Back in Ali's corner, Ali was finished. He couldn't go on. Yeah, he couldn't move. He was done. And he told his cornermen, the fight's over. Cut my gloves off. Ali quit. And at this point, his corner started looking for something to cut the gloves off with. And just as that was happening, back in Smoking Joe's corner, Smoking Joe, who was begging his corner not to give in, not to throw in the towel, his trainer looked at Joe and said, I can't do it to you. He was so concerned that Joe Frazier would die in the ring that night that he didn't listen to his man. He picked up that towel and he threw it in. Now, back in Ali's cornermen couldn't find anything to cut the gloves off with. Ali had already quit. No one knew this, but they couldn't find anything to cut his gloves off with. And just as they were about to throw in the towel, Frazier's side quit first. Ali couldn't believe it. Ali knew he was done. Ali knew the fight was over. But because Frazier's team threw in the towel, Ali was the victor. Ali was the champion. His side went wild. Ali, if you look at the match that night, if you look at the fight, he walks to the middle of the ring and collapses. He could not believe it. He was exhausted. They had to bring out the smelling salts. They had to wake him up. It's amazing. But if Smoking Joe and his corner would have just held on, they would have been the victors. And Frazier would have been champion again. And history would be different. Instead, Ali was champion because his opponent quit before anyone heard that Ali was ready to finish and throw in the towel. This whole quality that I'm getting at is about sometimes, most of the time, the winner is the guy who quits last. Is the man or woman that throws one more punch, that gets off the mat one more time, that keeps going when everyone else won't. There's an old Norwegian saying. The Norwegian saying is that a hero hangs on one more second than anyone else. To be a champion, to be an elite competitor, you have to tap into that primal need, that primal instinct to outlast all those around you, to push on when everyone else is going home, when everyone else is giving in, to strive and to keep going when everyone else just wants to throw in the towel. I'll give you another quote, another saying, boxing again, this time from film, from the movies. Rocky VI, Rocky Balboa, when he's speaking to his son. It's such a motivating and uplifting speech when he speaks to his son. But there's something he says. He says, it's not about how hard you get hit. It's about how many times you can get hit and keep going. It's about how much you can take and keep moving forward. When everyone goes home, when everyone's done for the day, are you willing to keep pushing? Are you willing to keep going? Are you willing to stay when everyone else wants to go back to a warm bed, a hot meal, a night out with the boys? Yeah, are you still there toiling away in search of victory? When everyone else is finished knocking on doors, is finished with the phones and done, are you still willing to pick up that phone and make one more phone call? Are you still you still willing to knock on one more door? Are you still willing to make one more pitch? Try one last time to get a deal. Just one deal changes the game. One call can change your life. I've got a quote for you guys that I want to read to you. This is a great one. Yeah. Listen to this. I wasn't born with any innate talent. I've never been naturally gifted at anything. I always had to work at it. The only way I knew how to succeed was to try harder than anyone else. Dogged persistence is what got me through life. But here was something I was half decent at. Being able to run great distances was the one thing I could offer the world. Others might be faster, but I could go longer. My strongest quality is that I never, ever give up. Now that quote is by a guy by the name of Dean Karnazes. This is the guy that wrote the book. This is the guy that wrote the book about running 50 marathons in 50 days. This is a guy that could run day and night, non-stop, for 3 days, for 72 hours. He wrote another book called Ultra Marathon Man. When you look in the mirror, when it's all said and done, if you're in sales and you're struggling and striving to be great, if you're pushing to have the best month ever, and among all things, all you can think about, everything else aside, is being number one, is being top dog, is being a cut above. If you're only focusing on the win, you're focusing on the wrong thing. You need to focus on the actions that will get you there, not the results, because it's the actions that in the end will turn you into a champion and get you everything else you want. You want to talk about being a success in sales? Are you looking in the mirror at the end of a month and saying, you know what? I wasn't the top salesman, but I gave it everything I had. I left everything on the table. Blood, sweat, and tears. There was absolutely nothing else I could have done to win. Then you're a champion. Because if that's the way you approach your business, then you've already won. And if you don't win today, you'll win tomorrow. And if you don't win tomorrow, you'll win the next day. But in the end, with that type of mindset, you will always be champion. You will always be successful. When it comes to competing, becoming a champion isn't about just winning. Don't worry about whether or not you'll come in first. Focus on being the last man standing. That's how winning is done. By quitting last. And that's the number one quality that I'm talking to you about today when it comes to developing the mindset of a champion. Be the last man standing. Quit last.